Right down the chute, Kevin Durant.
NBA Lockdown with Bruce Bowen.
Gets it to James. Here's a three for the win. Good! It is good!
The NBA Lockdown podcast with Bruce Bowen. Here's ESPN.com NBA columnist Israel Gutierrez.
Welcome into another edition of the NBA Lockdown podcast. Bruce Bowen, unfortunately, even though the finals begin on Thursday, Bruce Bowen's unavailable today, so we're going to have a few guests fill in for him. We're going to start off with Jason Minnix of ESPN 1250 in San Antonio and Michael Wallace of ESPN.com from Miami. We will talk NBA Finals to kick this off.
I always try to be honest with Pop. He knows. But if I'm 50%, I'll try to play. If I'm under 50%, we can argue.
That was Tony Parker discussing his left ankle injury that a lot of people are wondering how effective he's going to be. He says he's going to play. And to talk more about this game one in this entire series, since we don't have Bruce Bowen, we've got Jason Minnix of ESPN 1250 in San Antonio and Mike Wallace of ESPN.com in Miami at the moment. All right, guys. You know, there's been a lot of talk about all this sort of, the Tim Duncan inadvertent trash talk and all this. I don't really care about that, frankly, so I'm going to skip right over that and talk actual basketball. And I think one of the things that sort of gets overlooked here, because there's this whole conversation about, well, the Spurs are better than they were last year. Miami's not as good as they were last year. The Spurs have home court advantage. To me, this series comes down to defending the Spurs because, you don't beat the Spurs by having better players than them. Otherwise, Oklahoma City would have won. You have to be able to defend that team and the way they play offense. So let me start with you, Mike. How concerned do you think the Heat are with for the ability to defend the Spurs when they have a Manu Ginobili who looks better than he did last year at this time? And you've got a Heat team that, yeah, Dwayne Wade's a little healthier, but they're not exactly, spring chickens and probably, not as ideally suited to defend this type of ball movement, especially coming off of a series against the Pacers where they didn't have to deal with this type of ball movement. It was a more vanilla offense and less ball and player movement. So how concerned are the Heat right now with this, defending this team, and how concerned should they be?
Well, I think there is a concern and a healthy respect because it couldn't be more night and day in terms of an adjustment, as you mentioned, from defending the Indiana Pacers who come right at you and really don't have a pure point guard, really don't take a lot of threes and don't have a lot of ball movement, to defending the best team in the league at those things and have one of the MVP basically at that position at point guard, and some shooters that can stretch their defense. Stretch the rotation all the way, probably to 7, 8, 9 deep. So Miami is concerned about that. They didn't have any success at all, even though Tony Parker, was sort of here and there last year. He completely frightened Norris Cole, and he completely did what he wanted to do against Mario Chalmers for the most part in that series, and I think they have to find an adjustment there. They also have to defend the three-point line. We saw Danny Green basically set an NBA Finals record or playoff record for three-pointers in that series through the first 5 or so games. So it's one of those situations where that's going to be the bread and butter. They have to get those rotations out of there. They have to move side to side laterally, and I think that's one thing Miami hasn't proven to do yet over the course of the season, is have that kind of ball movement and flexibility defensively to track the three-point line.
Jason, what is it about the Spurs right now? There was that one play that kept showing on a loop where I think it was Manu hit Tim Duncan on a cut, and then he sort of one-armed caught it and kicked it out to the corner. I forget for who. It might have been Kawhi Leonard. But what is it about the Spurs offense right now that's got it humming so well? Is it obviously, they've dealt with the athleticism of the Thunder and found a way around it after a couple of, a 2-game stumble. But just how good is this offense right now in terms of what you're seeing now as compared to what you saw last year, maybe any other time where the offense was just kind of humming this well?
Well, you look at everybody buys in and everybody is unselfish. They don't have guys that are worried about their own personal stats. It's all about the team and making that extra pass. And Greg Popovich preaches all the time about how you want to find a great shot. Don't take a good shot, make that extra pass, get a great shot, and their ball movement is predicated on that. And when they're doing that, they're going to be hard to stop because they're going to find it. I know Bruce isn't here today, but we had Bruce Bowen on our show yesterday here in San Antonio, and he was talking about where Miami is going to struggle. It's not on the first pick and roll. It's the second, third option on that one particular play where the Spurs will make you guard them for all 24 seconds as they look for that great shot, not settling for a contested bad shot. San Antonio doesn't take a lot of bad shots, and if their ball movement is good, they're hard to defend. It's when their ball movement stops. If you can stop their ball movement, Dallas did that some in the first round. Oklahoma City did that in games 3 and 4 of the Western Conference Finals. Their offense is awful, but if their ball movement is going, they're going to be hard to defend.
Yeah, to me it starts obviously with Tony because if you think about it, if he breaks you down, if he gets a shoulder by you, think about all the things you've got to try to defend against. You've got to stop him from getting an easy layup or a floater. You've got to stick to Tim Duncan so he doesn't get an easy pass and a put in or an offensive rebound. You got to keep a body on Kawhi Leonard. That guy last year was a fool on the boards. He's just flat out a fool as a small forward, averaging 11 rebounds in that series. In a game that series. You've got to know where Danny Green is. You can't give him any space, and the Heat learned that, as Mike mentioned last year. And Manu Ginobili or any other shooter that you have out there, there's so many keys you have to pay attention to, and then you've got to do it like 3 or 4 times within a possession. It seems pretty impossible to stop. But, Mike, what was it last year that let them do that? Because it felt like, to me, Tony Parker kind of fell off as the series kept going, and we all know Danny Green got a lot more attention paid to after him in Games 6 and 7. But was it more Tony Parker, or was it more the Heat's sort of defense and that flying around that eventually got to him? Because this year you might not have to deal with 100% Tony Parker. Maybe it's a little easier for Miami.
Well, if you remember, Tony Parker was dealing with an injury last year too. So I mean, it was something that he had to fight through as well when he came into those finals. But I think what Miami did to sort of switch things up, and their natural default against teams like this is to trap that first point guard, trap them out high, get them to pass the ball, and make somebody else beat you with their decision making. But the thing with the Spurs is that's why Manu Ginobili, his confidence level has to be so vital and key, because if he's confident, he can be just as capable of running that offense and giving, passing, as you mentioned, on the play to Duncan and then to Kawhi Leonard. Boris Diaw is another guy that can handle their half-court sets from an offensive standpoint in terms of being a facilitator. So even if you neutralize Tony Parker, the Spurs still have 2 other guys that can probably get him in the offense. And even Danny Green has gotten better with his ability to pass and dribble as opposed to just being a standstill shooter. So I don't know if that's going to work. Miami's just going to have to get San Antonio to defend them, get them in foul trouble, and probably force Popovich to make some adjustments and go deeper into his bench much sooner than he anticipates. It's going to be about who makes who uncomfortable first, and I think that's why LeBron and Dwayne Wade have to be attackers and sort of use their offense to almost play defense as well.
Well, Izzy, I was going to say, and to piggyback on, what Mike is saying there, and he's right. I mean, you think about LeBron last year, especially in the first couple games, settled for a bunch of jumpers. The Spurs dared him to make that 17, 18, 19-foot shot, and he didn't shoot the ball well. But the Spurs offensively, Tony Parker had that grade 2 hamstring strain game 6 and 7, and they still had their opportunities to win that series. And Ginobili, who looked broken down last year, made a ton of mistakes, a lot of turnovers. He said yesterday, which, he knows himself better than anybody, he said physically he was fine in the finals last year, even though he didn't look like it. He said it was all mental. This year, Ginobili is playing well, and you saw him run the point when Tony Parker didn't play in that closeout game against Oklahoma City. It was Ginobili running the point late fourth quarter and in overtime and did a fantastic job for the Spurs. If he's feeling good, Spurs fans are feeling good.
Yeah, it's interesting with Manu. That's where I was going to ask you about, Jason, is like, he says he was feeling fine and it was all mental, but it was the whole season last year. I mean, I think he shot 43% last year and was, 3 or 4 points better this year, right around 47%. So it couldn't have been just, mental in those finals. But I remember thinking to myself in those finals, like, he's trying way too hard. Like I remember he tried, I think it was the one-handed crossover in one game in Miami, and that eventually got ripped. And he was just trying to split double teams off the pick and roll. And I felt like if he was just a little bit more solid, that they would have won the series in Game 6 because it wouldn't have even been as close as it was down the stretch that allowed Ray Allen to tie it. What do you think that is about Manu? Like, is it really just a matter of is he not going to try to do all the tricky stuff this year? Is he just going to be more efficient? Like, what do you think is going to be the biggest difference with him if it isn't a health thing?
Well, he's got to play smart, and he is healthy, and he was broken down all of last year, is he? And, Ginobili's been one of my favorite players since he joined the Spurs. I mean, he's just so fun to watch. But last year I was calling for him to retire. I don't want to see a broken down Manu Ginobili like you're seeing Steve Nash out there with the Lakers now. You don't want to see a player get to that point where they can't be themselves. Ginobili has transformed his game through the years. When he first signed with the Spurs, the way he played back then, think about 03, 04, 05, you thought this guy would only have a 4 or 5 year career because of what he does to his body. But his game has evolved. But last year, it looked like mentally he thought he could still do things that he could do in 2005, and physically he couldn't, but his mind was telling him he could. He forced too much. This year he's healthy. He didn't play for Argentina over the summer, rested, Pop managed his minutes all season long, and he's making better decisions and playing to his capabilities at this point in his career.
Yeah, the decision-making is what's key for him in this series to me. So that's going to be another issue the Heat has to deal with. But on the other end, Mike Wallace of ESPN.com along with Jason Minnix of ESPN 1250 in San Antonio. Mike, okay, so I feel like we know what we're going to do with LeBron, right? They're probably going to pull that same type of defense. All right, I got to ask you, it's sort of twofold. One, LeBron, is his mindset going to be any different? Because to me last year, it wasn't that he was confused that he had the space. It was that he didn't want to have to take those shots because he knows that if the offense isn't working like a true offense, if it's just me against the Spurs, that's not going to work in a 7-game series. So he was hesitant to go ahead and just fire away when they gave him that space. Does his mindset change where he sort of like shoots, like a team shooting somebody out of a zone? Like, I feel like he wants to shoot them out of that defense early as opposed to taking 3 games to really figure it out and then, have the offense flow properly. And then let's just say that is the case. Where do you see Dwayne Wade playing a role here? Because last year it was almost like give me what you got when you can get it, versus now I feel like he can also play a little bit more quarterback and be the ball handler and keep LeBron out of some of those situations where he's just looking at Boris Diaw, who's standing 8 feet in front of him and sort of being in a standstill. How do those two change the dynamic of how this series is going to be played?
Well, that's the brilliance of Greg Popovich and the defense that they're throwing at LeBron, because basically it's not designed to stop LeBron or Dwayne Wade, if you really think about it. Peel it back a couple of layers. It's not designed to stop them. It's designed to make LeBron hesitate and think and say, hold up, this is an open 15-footer. Why am I not taking this? It's designed to make them think that, okay, well, I have to take this shot, and if Popovich is fine with LeBron scoring 40. He just doesn't want LeBron to create opportunities for, a guy like Ray Allen, a guy like Shane Battier, or last year was Mike Miller. If LeBron is facilitating and breaking down that space and then creating openings for other guys, that's what Greg Popovich is concerned about. He would even take a 40-point game from LeBron, a 30-point game from Dwayne Wade. If you can hold Chris Bosh and the rest of those guys to substandard numbers, you win that game. So I think that's the key. But another thing we haven't really mentioned is that defense is only effective if Miami can't get stops on the other end, which allows San Antonio to get back in transition and set up defensively. So Miami has to get blocks, they have to get steals, they have to get traps. They have to not even let San Antonio get set up defensively and create a transition-type game. Now, the question there is, does Miami have the gas to be able to play at that pace? Because we both know LeBron James and Dwayne Wade can go. They can do it in spurts, but they can't do it they can't go Russell Westbrook and do it, all game long. So that's what the key is, and that's why Pop is such a brilliant, mind when it comes to that kind of defensive strategy.
Listen, they want to get turnovers. They want to get blocks. Just make sure Thiago Splitter's on the floor. They abused him last year, and I'm pretty sure they're going to try to take advantage again. Jason, where do you think Kawhi Leonard can improve? Because everybody talks about how he's a better player than last year, and that's fine. He might have refined certain things, but he still averaged 14.5, 11 rebounds, 2 steals, and shot 51% in last year's finals. Can he possibly play better? And if so, like, what about his game? Is it just a confidence about him? What about his game is allowing him to do better than that?
Well, it is confidence, and he had a great finals series, but he didn't look for a shot last year. He took what was given to him, but he didn't look. He wasn't aggressive offensively, and this year he has been. Pop has challenged him to be more aggressive, to, if you've got the shot, take it. And one of the things I really like about Kawhi this year is he is attacking the rim more, not just settling for some outside shots. He can hit the three. He's developed a nice mid-range game, but he's not afraid to go at the rim and go for a dunk. I mean, you saw him, go right after Serge Ibaka. He's not afraid, but the fact that he's become more of a scoring option than, in last year, even his rookie year, where he might have been the fourth or fifth option, now he's probably the third on a lot of sets that the Spurs are going to run. And then he's getting it done. He's become such a better defender. I mean, I don't know if you call that a block or a steal, whatever it is he did to Russell Westbrook there in overtime. But, his hands, and you hear about the size of his hands, but his quickness, his ability to read the situation has gotten better. And Greg Popovich has talked a lot this year about, in college he was an inside player, and he only had 2 years at San Diego State. This is his third year in the NBA where he's become more of an outside player, so he's still learning it. I think he learned a lot going against LeBron last year, obviously going against Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook in this past series, but he is just an overall better player here in his third year.
To piggyback onto that, I mean, I think it's key that he continues to attack, because LeBron might not spend a lot of time defending Kawhi initially, but at some point, if Kawhi is going to attack and basically obliterate whoever his man is defensively in that matchup, it's going to force the Heat to shift LeBron onto him. I'm thinking LeBron is going to try to hide from that matchup and maybe go more Boris Diaw, maybe even go Danny Green. But if Kawhi gets off, you're going to have to sick LeBron James on him and try to stop him. If he could do that, he could still create some fouls, 1 or 2 fouls here or there, to make LeBron have to think about, some of his defensive strategies.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, LeBron is probably best anyway when he's on somebody where he can cheat and play the passing lanes a little bit, and you can do that a lot more on a guy like Diaw if necessary, as opposed to Kawhi, where if you don't stick to him, he's probably getting an offensive board or a wide open look somewhere that he's going to knock down. All right, I want to get into sort of the big picture of which accomplishment is more impressive, which obviously, there's no real scale for these things. But before I do that, let's just wrap up the actual series talk and say, hey, Jason, you go first, and then Mike after him. Let me know who you've got in this series and why.
I think the Spurs win this series, not just because I'm in San Antonio, but, they were so close last year and they didn't get it done. Miami made the shots and the plays down the stretch, but the Spurs were 28 seconds away from winning Game 6, and they wet the bed. They didn't get it done. And for them to refocus, to come back this year, have the best record with all the different lineups, 17 different lineups, all the injuries they battled through, dealing with Oklahoma City and almost the deja vu of 2012. And Tim Duncan willed that team to that Game 6 win in overtime. He was fantastic. Tim Duncan seems on a mission. I think the Spurs go back to Miami. They close it out in 6 and get what they thought they left behind last year.
Wow, I can definitely see that. I actually picked the Spurs in 7 as well, but that was more based on the fact that they have home court advantage. I think, and I said this before, my pick is sort of like the NFL line, where you give the home team 2.5 points or 3 points because basically a field goal is difference. But the same thing that he just said, I could say the same thing about Miami. I mean, this is a team that, yes, everybody focuses on San Antonio was 28 seconds away from winning it in Game 6, but they had 48 minutes to do it in Game 7 and still couldn't do it straight up either. Without all of the miraculous things that happened.
And Mike, can you think about it? I mean, I was surprised they were able to recover and even be competitive in that Game 7 after what happened in Game 6, but they even had their chances late in Game 7 and couldn't get it done.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. I mean, sometimes the sort of flukish thing can only go so far. I mean, they did have their chances, and they still couldn't get it done. So ultimately, these teams are so close together. And I just think at the end of the day, I'm giving San Antonio the nod slightly, but it would not surprise me if it went the other way with Miami. My question is, can Tim Duncan – it's going to take Tim Duncan to turn back the clock and have a vintage Tim Duncan performance maybe 3 or 4 times in this series, considering Tony Parker's injury and some other issues. So if he can do that, they can win this series. Otherwise, I think Miami's strength and LeBron James's presence and the healthier Dwayne Wade could be enough to put them over the top.
Yeah, I've got the Heat in 6. I don't think any of I think the motivation they kind of just it's a push. You know,
Right.
You've got one team trying to get back from last year, trying to get a 5th ring for Tim Duncan and Popovich, etc. Miami's trying to do their own thing, man. LeBron's trying to be the best player of all time, and he wants to get a 3-peat on that resume. And the rest of these guys desperately want to win it too, for him, but also for themselves. For most of the guys that were here for all 3 of these. So I think that's a push. I just think it comes down to, can Miami overcome? Can they overcome that Spurs offense? Can they defend well enough? Can they sort of get past the mental hurdle that is Greg Popovich and how he devises the defense? And can they get past that home court edge? And to me, it almost serves Miami better in this case to have, when they switch to a 2-2-1-1-1, to be on the road to start it, because the way that he look at it is, look, you give me 2 games to adjust to a team. It doesn't matter where it is. I feel like we're going to win one of them. That's their mentality. So I think they come out of San Antonio 1-1 and then wrap it up in 6. But, you could just tell by the Vegas line and how close these 2 teams are that any call would be a reasonable one. So let me just wrap this up, guys, by asking you, when you look at the Spurs, Jason, and then I'll just ask, I'll ask Mike for the Heat perspective. When you look at the accomplishments, the Spurs, let's start with, 16 years between finals appearances for his first and his most recent, Tim Duncan, and looking for 5 championships, being consistently great, basically being an injury or 2 away from already having a couple more rings. Which one to you, Jason, is more impressive? That sort of extended longevity and that sustaining greatness for that long, and now having 4 titles, or the 4 finals in 4 consecutive years, which the Spurs are just making the first time where they've gone back-to-back finals, and then the potential to win 3 straight in this NBA era. Which one to you is the more impressive feat, or would be the more impressive feat?
Getting to 4 straight finals, even in a weak Eastern Conference, is impressive, and you can't take anything away from what Miami has done. I mean, the luck, the ability to stay healthy, persevere, play that many basketball games, and stay hungry. That says a lot about Miami. But when you think about San Antonio, and we'll start with the '99, the first championship, but then you draft Tony Parker late in the first round, you get Ginobili in the second round, you win in '03. In 2004, Derek Fisher hit that .4 shot. That could have been back-to-back for San Antonio. They didn't get it done. '05, they go back and they beat Detroit in a great 7-game series. In '06, in a Game 7 at the AT&T Center in the Western Conference Finals, Manu fouls Dirk. Dirk makes the free throws. Spurs don't go back. And then they go back and win it in 2007. After about 2008, 2009, you're thinking this run is over. And that's how long we've been talking about in San Antonio, is how many more years can San Antonio do this? Well, in 2012, they're in the Western Conference Finals up 2-0, and they blow it to Oklahoma City. They go to the finals last year and lose it. They're back in the finals again this year with the same core group, same coach. That's impressive. That's unheard of, to have finals appearances 6-7 years apart from your last title. You think about what this group has done and the way they were built to do it is impressive. And in San Antonio, there's a billboard up that says built versus bought. However you want to look at it, I think both are impressive. San Antonio's legacy is going to be there in longevity, even without back-to-back championships or back-to-back finals appearances before this year on that resume. But I think they need the gold ball to move ahead of Miami and what they've done with 4 straight appearances.
Mike, same question for you, bud. Which one do you think is would be more impressive a feat in today's NBA?
I definitely, just hearing that, basically the resume that San Antonio has put together, and we're talking about over stretches of 3 different decades, man. I mean, that's, the late 90s, obviously through the 2000s, and now we're midway through the 2010s, and, they're still there. You know what I mean? They just won't go away. They just, find a way to, to retool, to put, they went from a stretch where they had primarily veterans playing around that core group, and then they went to young guys playing around the core group, and it's just a remarkable feat. And I think, to hear it like that, it's sort of, the first thing I thought about was, wow, that might be the modern-day version of those 60 Celtics. Even though they didn't win them, all back-to-back, just the fact that they were a shot here, 0.4 of a second there, a freak injury here from being able to string that kind of, run together is remarkable. And I tend to lean towards San Antonio because even a guy like Pat Riley would tell you that he's trying to build in Miami what San Antonio has. So that right there trumps it all to me right there. I mean, he can only hope that the Heat's big three can stay together for another couple seasons to even do half of what San Antonio has done, and that would be a remarkable feat there. So San Antonio gets the nod in my book as well.
Yeah, to me, the higher high is this Miami run right now. 4 straight, top of the world for 1,200 days. It's just you feel like you're the world's happiest basketball fan. But in the overall, which fan would I rather be? I'd rather be the Spurs fan, to be honest with you, because let's just say hypothetically LeBron James doesn't re-sign with Miami. This is as good as it's going to get, and it lasted 4 years. Okay, it's never going to get this good again unless you are so fortunate to get either the best player in the game in LeBron James or somebody like Tim Duncan, the best player in his position and arguably one of the top 3 or 4 or 5 best players in the game. That's not just going to happen again unless you're incredibly fortunate. So I'd rather be that team that for 15, 16 years has always had a chance, and you feel like, and every once in a while they do show you, and 4 times so far, 5 finals appearances, they do show you they can't win it all. And that, to me, it just lasts longer and just is the better experience. I'd rather be the Patriots, let's say, than a Giants fan right now because, they got their 2 rings, but the Patriots have been amazing for more than a decade, and they continue to do so. So,
Izzy, to piggyback on that, my daughter will be 16 in August. She has never
all she knows is Spurs greatness.
Yeah, she has never not known the Spurs in the playoffs and has enjoyed one Dallas Cowboy playoff win in her lifetime.
I don't think there's any better way to wrap this up than with a subtle dig at Tony Romo and Jerry Jones and the boys. So Mike Wallace of ESPN.com, Jason Minnix of ESPN 1250 in San Antonio. Thank you for joining me here on the podcast, filling in for Bruce. I have to say you guys did a fantastic job. We're going to take a quick break here. When we get back, we're going to give the Celtics some love, maybe. We'll talk about that in a minute with Chris Forsberg of ESPNBoston.com.
ESPN Radio.
With the action on the court, the diamond, or the gridiron.
Comes alive.
The NBA.
The Miami Heat have won the 2013 NBA title.
Major League Baseball.
The Boston Red Sox have won the World
The
Series.
full championship series.
The tide has risen again, the 3rd time in 4 years.
Your home for the best in sports play-by-play.
ESPN Radio.
I talked to Kevin for about 39 seconds. It wasn't too. We didn't talk a lot. I told him wish good luck here this time here in Boston. He spent a couple of days here in Boston, and I told him I was spending a couple of months here in Boston. So.
That was Rajon Rondo trying not to get fined for tampering. No, that was Rajon Rondo talking about Timberwolves forward Kevin Love, who spent some time in Boston kind of checking out the area conveniently maybe, or maybe there was other things in mind. Joining us to talk about this now is Chris Forsberg of ESPNBoston.com. All right, Chris, before we get into any particulars, the idea of Rondo and Love chatting while the NBA wouldn't allow something like, he really can't pitch anything to him. Is there anything to read into it at all from Kevin being there or from Rondo, chatting with him briefly?
It's hard not to read into it, right? I don't get the sense that a lot of NBA guys are sitting there in their off season thinking, where would I want to visit? Boston in late May, early June would be a nice destination. I don't know. You always wonder. I kept looking for something to come out, like he had a family member here, or a graduation ceremony, but nothing ever came out. It really did seem like he was just here to kind of look around and check things out. And he even admitted during the season, when I think one of his visits to Boston, he was asked, what do you know about Boston? And he obviously knew about the history, and he'd studied it as a kid, but he didn't know a lot about the city, and he seemed genuinely intrigued about it. And while he got the full Boston experience, gets up here, he's partying with all the sports stars in the area, bumping into Patriots at clubs and bumping into Rondo at Fenway. He certainly got a taste of what it's like to be a star up here.
Listen, you run into Rob Gronkowski anywhere, chances are you're going to really like hanging out there, okay? Because that guy looks like he can have a good time. All right, so let's see what the reality of this, in terms of a hypothetical here is. Kevin Love, we all know he is pretty unhappy in Minnesota because he's not winning, and everybody's basically questioning whether his numbers are real or if they're empty, and he needs to be on a winner or at least make the playoffs in order to be a legitimate all-star, superstar, MVP candidate, yada, yada. Got another year left in his deal before he can be a free agent, but chances are he's going to strongly suggest that the Minnesota Timberwolves trade him. What about Boston in terms of what they have to give, to offer Minnesota, makes this a potential landing spot for him?
Yeah, so what the Celtics have going in their favor is they've just sort of built this war chest of assets over the past couple of years, and it really started last off season when it starts with Doc and getting traded. For all intents and purposes, they trade him to the Clippers, and they get a first-round pick out of that. And then they turn around and they trade Pierce and Garnett to Brooklyn and get 3 number ones there and the ability just to swap a couple picks in between. So they've got, I think it's 10 potential first-rounders over the next 5 years. And we just know in the NBA how valuable those are now. So you wonder if they cobble a couple of those together. They've got some young talent, whether it's someone like Jared Sullinger or Kelly Olynyk, their 2 top picks in the last 2 drafts. And then they've got Keith Bogan's contract, which is non-guaranteed, so a team can shed $5 million right off its books. There's a lot. It depends on what Minnesota is looking for. But if there's one team that can say, like, all right, if you want a little bit of young talent, we got it here. If you're looking for picks, we got it here. If you're looking for salary relief, the Celtics have the ability, whether it's with Kevin Love or anybody, to make a run at a big-ticket player. And I just think that the other teams are going to be intrigued by what they can offer. Now, they don't quite have Cleveland's number 1 pick, or, other teams can come in and probably dangle something a little bit more glitzy, but the Celtics have enough to sort of get in the mix, and whether that's enough to entice Minnesota remains to be seen.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because, you look at a team like Golden State, for example, one of the teams that has been rumored would make a run at him. They've got actual, young talent, like whether it be a Klay Thompson or a Harrison Barnes, and a David Lee, who's, a multiple-time All-Star, and, a future first-round pick. They don't have as many assets in terms of picks as Boston does. So to me, it would be just a matter of what the Timberwolves want to do or what they would prefer to do, whether they'll go really young or with, draft picks or take a couple of players that are established, when normally in that scenario you have to take on a bad contract or something. And I guess David Lee would be the equivalent of a bad contract / stopgap power forward. But the idea of Boston, in terms of Kevin Love, I think would be more attractive because, Golden State's, they're a great up-and-coming franchise. Steph Curry, MVP candidate, 2 of them together would be phenomenal, but it doesn't really have a track record of going for it all, of having the right front office mix, of really being a championship contender very often. You don't know what can happen over there with Boston. Not only do they have that championship pedigree, but they also have a history of making some successful trades for Minnesota Timberwolves power forwards. So it would seem like it's a good place for him. Could you see a scenario where Paul Pierce comes back? He's a free agent. He gets less money. They still, maybe they can keep Jeff Green. They got Kevin Love. That's a playoff team in the Eastern Conference next year regardless, and that's where Kevin Love wants to go. Could you see in your final sort of analysis a realistic situation where he comes to this team and they're 4 or 5 seed in the playoffs next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rondo was talking about it the other day. Like, he's got his own little situation coming up here. He's in a very similar boat where he wants to test unrestricted free agency next summer. So, it's, he hasn't said it, but he's hinted at it that, he wants the Celtics to put this back together pretty quickly. He doesn't want to have the uncertainty and when it comes time for his next deal of still going through this rebuilding process. And he kept saying it, like, I trust in Danny, and I trust Danny's up in his office right now, putting together the deal that's going to, put us back into contending. And he wants to contend for a title. He's not content just to get back and be a 4 or 5 seed and get bounced in the second round against Miami. He wants to genuinely compete. And you do think, all right, so the East, more than ever, like, Kevin Love's going to be intrigued by that alone, just coming to this dilapidated East. You got Rondo. The Celtics have Avery Bradley as a restricted free agent. They can bring him back at a reasonable number this year. You do have Jeff Green. You see what happens, what you got to give up if you had to get Love, if it's Jared Sullinger or Olynyk. Those guys are swapping out the position, so it's not such a big loss. You do wonder if the Celtics would then turn around and try to address their center spot. They've got this huge trade exception from the Pierce-Brooklyn deal where they could call a team like Houston and try and get a seat from them, and all of a sudden, that starting five in the East, that's pretty darn good. I think that's enough to give you a chance at least to be in the mix. And then, all of a sudden you got all that talent together. Guys are going to be intrigued. I absolutely think Paul Pierce would sit there and say, I'm sure he's intrigued by the idea of coming back to Boston on the surface.
Yep.
But he's also, at his age, he doesn't want to not come back to help a rebuild. But if there's a chance to win and to come back to someplace familiar, I absolutely think he'd embrace that role. I definitely see a scenario where the Celtics could put this together and jump right back into it. It just comes down to how much they'd have to give up. You want to sustain that contendership, and you don't want to give up 4 first-rounders just for the chance to get Love in here and for a year.
Listen, if I'm Boston, I'm selling Kelly Olynyk hard. I'm like, look, he's perfect for Minnesota. He practically looks like a new age Christian Laettner for you guys. Make it happen. Take this guy. But anyway, Chris Forsberg, ESPNBoston.com. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for catching us up on this, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe I think it'd be interesting to happen. I'd love to see Rondo and Love and maybe even Paul Pierce and a different type of big three out there. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. After going through a 57-loss season, even I'm ready for some wins again over here.
So once again, wanted to thank Jason Minnix of ESPN 1250 in San Antonio and Mike Wallace of ESPN.com and the Heat Index, and, of course, to Chris Forsberg of ESPNBoston.com. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the NBA Lockdown Podcast. Don't forget, I know you're not going to forget, but we've got the NBA Finals on Thursday, coverage on ABC and on ESPN Radio. Hope you enjoy the game. We will be back on Friday to discuss. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the NBA Lockdown. For more great podcasts, visit the Pod Center page at ESPNRadio.com.